Hey, welcome back everyone. Now, as the title suggests, I want to walk you through my journey piecing together and restoring this Chilean 1912 short rifle and ask the question, is it worth the time and money to return a Milsurp to its original or restored configuration? Now, I hear this question get asked a lot, and I see a good deal of people out there trying their hand at either restoring military surplus rifles or taking sporterized surplus rifles and returning them to their original state. There are also a ton of what you would call gunsmith specials on the current Milsurp market that are tempting targets for collectors who want a cheap historical Milsurp as a fun restoration project or assume it's a good deal and they think they can scrounge missing parts relatively easily. For $100 to $200, you can get beat up Carcanos, Lee Enfields, and even some Mausers that are in various states of disrepair. You can find these online if you know where to look. I went to a show earlier this year where they had probably 20 Carcanos laid out on the table, and they were selling these for like $100, $99 a piece, and they all either had cracked stocks, maybe a missing bolt, and other various missing parts. But every day it seems like someone is bringing up project guns on online forums because they bought something from RTI and want to restore them. Now, it's awfully tempting when you say to yourself, hey, I've got the barrel, bolt, receiver, and maybe a full stock for cheap. I can just get a few parts, and boom, I've got a shootable Lee Enfield for $300 instead of paying $600 for a complete rifle. I think the reality for many is a bit different once you begin that process of restoring it, especially if parts need to be replaced or fixed. Now, more often than not, you will find yourself spending a lot of time and money on projects that go beyond basic mechanical repairs and require professional gunsmith services to fix. So what I want to do is I want to walk you through my experience putting a Chilean model 1912 carbine back together and why I have no desire to go through this experience again. Now, this story starts back in July of 2019 when Century Arms had this carbine on sale for $210 in their surplus corner, advertised as having missing screws, a missing front handguard, cracked stocks, pitting on the metal, and various other issues. It also wasn't specific to this rifle they had. It was from a batch, of course. So I said, why not? It's cheap, and it will probably be a fun project. Now, when this rifle actually came in, it definitely had all these issues and more. It was missing the front barrel band, the transverse screw for the front barrel band, the trigger guard screws, plus the two timing lock screws, the rear ladder and sight assembly, the front handguard screw, the rear swivel mount and two swivel screws, and finally the magazine spring and follower. Additionally, it had a nice crack right through the wrist, which would need to be fixed. And then cosmetically, there was a decent amount of, I'll show you some close-up video, but there was a decent amount and is a decent amount of pitting on the metal. Nothing that would compromise the usability of the rifle, but it certainly wasn't pretty. The crest, the serial number, and the Steyr wording on the side of the receiver were still visible, but pitting wasn't far off from getting it. The barrel and receiver had matching numbers, but the rest was all mismatched parts. Now, luckily, the bore was in fairly decent condition, which kind of gave me the motivation to say, hey, I can actually turn this into a working rifle without it being trash. I imagine that this sat in some warehouse with water and humidity somewhere along its 100-year path as a rifle in Chilean service, and then to the U.S. surplus market. Also, the front sight band was completely loose and would need to be resoldered in place. So overall, it needed a lot of work. Furthermore, I didn't know much about Chilean Mausers to begin with, but I figured this would be another way to learn a few things about South American Mausers, a rifle market that I haven't really been into. What I ended up finding out is that Steyr only made 5,600 of these 1912 short rifles, which gave me a little bit more of an incentive to restore this to working condition, considering fewer numbers were made. Also, these are not to be confused with the 1912 61s that were cut down long rifles that were converted to 7.62 NATO in the 1960s, and I'll briefly touch on the history of this rifle in a bit. So first I made a list of everything I needed, but knowing that so few of these carbines were made, it would make it a little bit more difficult to find exact parts. Remember, I got this in 2019 and it is now December of 2023, so it's taken me just over 4 years to put it all back together. So first I scoured numeric parts for what I could find. Some of the things like the screws, the swivel mounts, and the timing screws were interchangeable with the 1912 long rifles, but other items like the rear sight ladder and the transverse barrel band screw were specific to just this model, so I had to wait several years for them to even pop up, specifically on eBay and numeric parts. Unlike the long rifle variant of the 1912 and many other Mauser models, The H-style front barrel band was held in place with a transverse screw. You can kind of see that right here, instead of a recessed spring. The transverse screw was such a unicorn that I'm surprised that I found it at all, which I only did about 4 months ago. Another challenge was that the screw drives directly into the wood of the stock through the barrel band hole instead of metal, so this was also a challenge getting that to fit into 110-year-old wood that had obviously swelled over that time. Now, for the magazine spring and follower, I had to use ones from a model 1910 Mexican Mauser, which was flagged as cross-compatible. So already we're using non-model fitting parts. I couldn't find a few of the screws on Numeric, so I grabbed a few reproductions that fit pretty nicely into this. Now, Numeric did have these white parade slings, which you can see it's cracking and peeling because of age and wear. But it did help kind of complete the look of the rifle, so why not pick one up while they're still available. So I calculated that all the smaller parts up to this point were about $175 total, which includes shipping and handling. I try to buy as many as possible in one batch just so I was saving money, and with that cost, we're at about $385 right now. Now, the other big challenge was finding the front handguard. This was another unicorn that I didn't think I would ever find. It honestly was my biggest worry when I got this rifle. I purchased a couple different South American carbine handguards. One was a Brazilian and the other was Argentinian, but these were too long and there was some issues with how flush they were with the rear sights. But there was on both of them, there was about a half an inch to an inch gap between the back of the handguard and the rear sights. Well, somehow I found a guy that had a couple reproduction Mauser handguards for sale. They were completely newly made and by whom he didn't know, but he ended up with them. But I got one and it miraculously was a perfect fit. And this set me back about $50, but I was pretty happy with this. Now, the downside to this was that the handguard was completely unfinished and was obviously not an original 1912 handguard. At this point, I was just happy to find one that fit because I never thought I would. So I touched up with some walnut stain. As you can see here, there's a little bit of discoloration between the original stock and the handguard. So the color isn't exact, but I can always touch that up later on. Now, at this point, it was starting to look like an actual rifle, but there was the matter of the cracked stock and the front sight band. Now, for the stock, I'll obviously overlay this with pictures of what it looked like cracked, but I opted to send it to a friend of mine that had experience working on cracked stocks instead of trying to fix it myself. This was primarily an application of acryglass to the crack, which needed to be widened just a hair to fit the acryglass in, but it did the trick. He charged me about $100 for the work and $50 for the back and forth shipping, but it did the trick and actually came out pretty nicely. You can still see a little bit of it on both sides, but from a distance, it's really not noticeable. I applied some Carpenter's beeswax polish to the stock just to give a little bit more shine and vibrancy. Now, to be honest, I had never tried my hand at soldering anything in my life, but decided to give it a go with the front sight band here. A couple people quoted a few $100s for the work, but I didn't think it was worth that much to sink into this project, so my dad and I just worked on this together one afternoon. Now, I was a little nervous that the heat treatment would ruin the bluing, but it actually turned out to be fine once it was all said and done with. Even if it had, there wasn't much historical value here in this rifle to see. So I was more than happy with how it turned out, and I'm glad I didn't sink additional dollars into this project. Now, that was the last puzzle piece, which honestly felt great to get out of the way. While it was fun and gave me a feeling of completeness once it was all back together, I wouldn't do this again if I didn't have to do it. So here's the overall cost breakdown. The original rifle was $210. The missing parts total were about $175. The handguard was $50. Services like the cracked stock repair and shipping was $100 plus $50, $150 for that. And then I would say another $30 to $40 for various tools, wood stains, and the soldering kit. So this was a total of $615 and 4 years of time waiting for correct or compatible parts to become available for this rifle. That's how long it took me when I got this rifle to putting it all back together. Now, the funny thing about this whole episode is that last year I saw the same exact rifle for sale at a local shop for about $500. So sometimes it just pays off to wait and find the right rifle to come to you. Again, unless your sort of thing is repairing and restoring rifles, or you're a gunsmith in training and like these sort of projects, that's another thing. But generally speaking, buying project rifles that you think are going to be easy to put together end up being more costly than you think. So I'm glad to not ever have to go through this exercise again, hopefully. Okay, so as far as collectability, it's now a complete rifle, but obviously it's made of mismatched parts, some reproduction parts, and cross-compatible parts that are not model specific. It also has a lot of cosmetic damage to the wood and heavy surface pitting on the metal. So with the final product in hand, let's go ahead and take her out to the range and see how she shoots. Throughout my long journey, I ended up acquiring an 1895 Chilean Mauser and the 1912 long rifle variant of the carbine. To accompany my Chilean Mauser collection, I purchased David Nielsen's book on the Chilean Mausers, which was extremely informative. Now, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Latin American countries were mass ordering small arms, mostly Mauser variants for Mauser, Steyr, and Fabrique Nationale. These European conglomerates basically dominated the small arms market in Latin America for over 4 decades and sold millions of rifles. Nationalism was extremely prevalent in the region, and there was a full-fledged arms race between these powers that many times erupted into hot border conflicts or full-fledged wars. Chile specifically was a huge purchaser of not just small arms, but also modern naval vessels, artillery, and all manner of industrial arms. They even invited German military advisors to transform their armed forces into a copy of the Prussian military system. Now, the Steyr Model 1912 was an export variant of the Model 98 design, which was a significant upgrade from the previous Model 1895s, with its large ring receiver, an extra locking lug in the rear of the bolt, a cock-on open design, and gas relief holes built into the bolt for a safer and more robust rifle. Chile ordered an estimated 37,000 rifles and 5,600 carbines, which this is one of those. Now, the purchase of the 1912s was mired in some controversy on both sides of the ocean. David's book goes in depth on the political background of the rifle deal, but basically Chile was shopping between Steyr and DWM for the best deal on a new rifle. Steyr was previously accused of supplying insufficient spare rifle parts. The Rifle Commission in Chile was accused of not doing their due diligence on parts purchasing. It was a big political scandal within the Chilean government. Long story short, people were fired, new commissions were established, and Chile decided to go with DWM for their rifle order instead of Steyr, which makes sense if you're worried about quality control. Well, as it turns out, DWM had a backlog of orders, so the contract was then given to Steyr in the end, and the whole spare parts scandal ended up being nothing anyways. Interestingly, some of the 1912 Mauser orders weren't entirely fulfilled since World War I broke out in 1914, and the remaining rifles were acquisitioned into Austro-Hungarian service. Well, the carbine itself is a nice rifle that has a lot of similarities to the K98K design. 7mm cartridge is a nice fit for this rifle, and it is actually a pleasure to shoot at the range. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and again, I never have to want to go through this experience again, but it is a cool rifle to have, and kind of kick-started my Chilean Mauser collection. So I'll see you guys later.